Hello. My name is Ryland Tom, and this is my podcast. And I'm here with my good friend David Liang. I
Hello.
am not doing this. I didn't tell you to introduce yourself yet, but that's
My bad.
okay. So, anyways, doing this for a project of mine. So it's not because I don't want to do this. I do want to do this for an A, but I'm going to talk about my philosophy class, Being and Knowing, with my good friend David, who I've known for a while. And further, his background, which is pretty cool, he has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in data science. So, to kind of start it up straight up, David, how do you define consciousness?
Uh, that is actually, I think, a very loaded question. I think consciousness, when we define it, in the fields that I've studied, a non, is a very ambiguous thing that allows any organism to think. And I think saying that is kind of vague as well because what does it mean to think? But I don't know how to answer that, but I think to me, it's like a framework uh of thing that gives a higher order organism the ability to reason and ability to think. I think that's my answer.
That's pretty good.
Thank you.
I'm glad also that you also been thinking about it big. So that's actually the whole topic of this podcast. We're gonna talk about consciousness. Thinking about how it's kind of been taught to me in my class. Further, kind of examining some written pieces of work that I've read in the class that talks about consciousness, and kind of hopefully connect that to AI and just expand also on our thoughts about it. So that's actually pretty good. I know it is loaded, and also I think what's cool is that you struggled, which was kind of the whole purpose of me asking it and what happened in our class. I believe like how we define it in class and just generally speaking, which I'm using from Peter Singer, which is he says, sorry, I'm trying to find it. If a being is not capable of suffering or of experiencing enjoyment or happiness, there is nothing to be taken into account. This is why the limit of sentience, and sorry, this is the part I want to highlight, using the term as convenient, if not strictly accurate, shorthand for the capacity to suffer or experience enjoyment or happiness. So I think like in our class, the way I've taken it and interpreted consciousness is just to be able to have experience and further to be able to feel pain, suffering, and also happiness and joy. Um, would you agree? Yes or no? Or and why? Or yeah, just pretty much yes or no. Would you agree with my definition?
Uh, so you're saying consciousness is the ability to feel like emotions?
Not necessarily emotion. So the way I interpret it, at least when we're talking about it in class, is to be able to feel literally pain and suffering, but also happiness and joy. For example, like literally a table, just to be very practical, right? It's not conscious. It can't feel pain if I punch it. It can't feel joy if I throw it at a birthday party. But a cat or a dog, it will feel pain, right? If I punch it or I abuse it or something. But it'll feel joy if I give it food or a treat. Wouldn't you agree?
Uh, what if the the in this case the non-conscious thing, let's just like say it's like a robot. Uh, let's say we make it closely emulate pain and suffering and also like happiness and joy, right? Or closest,
Sure.
let's make it emulate to what we understand of those things to the closest our ability, which maybe in like programming terms we didn't say like if A happens, so if you kick it, then it's going to feel pain. So it's like a flowchart kind of thing. And then let's say it's like a
Sure.
really complicated flowchart, which I think is what like AI is.
Right.
But so let's say if it's like a very complicated flowchart, and it's complicated enough that without looking deep into like the AI's quote unquote brain, you wouldn't know that it is like just a robot. Is that still like would you say that robot has consciousness, or is it just like just a very complicated flowchart of math?
I think it's so. That's funny that you say that. In terms of more practical in my thoughts, it's the latter. Um, I think not to dive in why it's not the former. If you look into it, did that robot really feel pain, or do we just cause it to say "ow" from in response to a kick at a certain type of flow, and it responds in this standard? So our opinion of pain is it gets kicked at this threshold, and then it says "ow." But did it really feel it, or did it just feel this input of force causing it to have that response?
Well, I
And we could
mean,
say the same. Uh-huh.
yeah, in terms of physical pain, I think I could like rebuke, right? Like it's very similar to humans and like animals as well. Because our pain
Hmm.
receptors, I think, are doing the exact same thing. When it like feels like an input that is that could harm the body, then that pain receptor is kind of like, kind of like a robot. It's like a kind of input, and then it goes to the brain and says, "Hey, this thing that just like happened to the body, could be harmful, and you should like output a response to, uh, you know, uh." Like a relevant response to that, and then that's how we say like "ow," because that's our I think that's our brain's way of telling us like this thing that you just did is harmful and you shouldn't do it anymore. So it's like unpleasant. So I think to some degree, at least in terms like physical pain, you can get a robot to emulate that.
And I think that's actually funny that you said that because in one of the papers that we've read is by Eric Switch Gables, which paper, and I'm kind of skipping over some stuff, but just to reference it from the paper, is there something it's like to be a garden snail? I believe it was from that we learned. He presented us a bunch of theories of what gives consciousness, and one of them actually from that is computationalism. And essentially, what gives consciousness, from my recollection, is just that the brain and what gives us consciousness is a bunch of computations. And the way you just kind of broke down our pain receptors is it's straight up, but just a computation. If I would say it's just like a process from A to B or C, etc. Um, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was trying to say. At least in terms of like physical pain.
For sure, for sure. So let's just take a mixture of both of ours, right? Let's just say, consciousness is some form of thinking that gives us like a higher order of thinking, right? With reasoning, and then further add on top of it, maybe has some form of pain and feelings of be able to have experiences of like pain and suffering, but also happiness and joy. Is that just a good compromise for now?
Yeah.
For sure. So just to kind of continue, and of course I still got to reference this because it is part of my class. I want to just talk about a few quotes. Well, actually, let's first start off. Wait, let me ask just this really quick. With consciousness, do you think it's kind of a black and white type of thing, or do you think it's more of a gray area where it's like a spectrum?
Uh, s-
Like, like where I were to say just really quick, if is consciousness saying, this is conscious, yes or no, and just that's it, and it's the same as our consciousness? Because I would like to believe, we're conscious humans. I believe you're conscious. I'm conscious, right? And then, so, I'm looking at my mouse. That's definitely not conscious. I look at a dog. That's definitely conscious. So would you say that, or would you say it's a spectrum? Like, maybe humans are at the top. Lower would be dogs and cats, or maybe whales or dolphins. You kind of just go in that order. Yeah. What do you think?
Uh, that's hard. So, okay, here's a question back to you. Do you think ants are conscious then? Because everything
Oh,
they do is like based off of like chemical trails, but then they're
right.
still living, right? So I don't okay, so what I'm trying to get with this is I don't know. I think in terms of labeling, I think it's probably pretty black and white. It's just we don't know the exact criteria to label that black and white label. I don't see how it could be a spectrum. Like I don't it feels wrong to just say like something is less conscious. I think if it's a conscious, then it's conscious, and if it's not, then it's not. But I just don't know like what defines consciousness. Well, which goes all the way back. I think we circled back to the original question.
Damn. Well, that's my whole point of this, and I gotcha. Um, you know, I'm not gonna lie. It's so funny that you're like now giving me like low key like Vietnam flashbacks, bro, to my class when we had this conversation. And I was just like, damn, this is interesting, but why the hell do I not know about this? And that's kind of leading us to the halfway mark. So we're gonna have a word from us, our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Is it bad that climbing feels so good? Hi, I'm Kimbro, a climber and professor of philosophy. To answer this question, we're going to look at the philosophical views of Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher who developed his own brand of hedonism in the 3rd century BCE. When you hear hedonism, you probably think a life of extreme pleasure, sex, drugs, rock and roll, that sort of thing. But Epicurus was rather down on alcohol, partying, and sex. They're okay if readily available, as it were, but not something you should seek out. Epicurus thought that we should always think about our long-term interests and avoid things that lead to short-term pleasure. So what kind of pleasure is climbing? It rather depends on why you're doing it. If your goal is fame or reputation, you'll never be satisfied. These are what he calls empty desires. However, if climbing fits into a good life and leads to more pleasure overall, Epicurus would give the thumbs up, even if it's miserable at times. A life full of pleasure is the goal, and it might be painful in the short term. While Epicurus had a sour opinion of marriage, he's all in for friendship, saying friendship dances around the world and encourages us to wake to blessedness. So if you're climbing for the friends and for the community, Epicurus would support your decision. In fact, Epicureans had little hedonistic communes scattered around the Greek world for hundreds of years after his death. So ask yourself, why do I climb? For fame or for friends? Keep this in mind next time you wonder.
And we are back. Man, wasn't that so cool of Kinsborough Moore climbing that rock? Like, dude, his muscles, bro. Alright. I hope I get extra credit or A for that. Anyways, huge shout out to Professor Moore and his rock climbing skills and his philosophy. But back to it, and I'm just kind of take over in this conversation because I think I want to kind of present these thoughts to you and for you to just think about a bit before, we continue to moving on to AI, which I hope for the second part of this conversation. So the first thing, you said you don't know consciousness, whether it's a, black and white, and you think it's black and white, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Right. And whether I presented a spectrum. And what's cool about this, like you obviously having doubts, is the whole point of the class to show that we don't really have this idea of consciousness. And I think my first point too, which I was hoping to tie it into, but I think our conversation kind of delved into a lot with consciousness, but it was connecting in this thing where I believe there's this general consensus actually that consciousness is kind of a spectrum. And the reason for that is I think, you would agree that we're smarter than a cat and a dog, right?
Yes.
Would you agree? Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
right? But is that basically Peter Singer, he wrote this article called All Animals Are Equal. And from my recollection, just memory of the article was just he wrote this thing about called speciesism. Similar kind of with racism, as in we have this preference for our own species. But I believe my interpretation further was to show that he's saying we have a preference for humans or based off this idea that we have the highest consciousness. And with that, he's trying to make a animals' rights argument, an ethical moral argument where, our treatment for animals is less than a human, our regard for them, yet is it because we base it off of consciousness? And leading into that, we don't really have this idea of consciousness. To kind of give a couple quotes, one from him. In this respect, the distinction between humans and non-humans is not a sharp division, but rather a continuum along which we move gradually, and with overlaps between the species, from simple capacities for enjoyment and satisfaction, or pain and suffering to more complex ones. Further, I think in this part where he's kind of making a moral argument for animal rights, but just trying to strictly to show something about where we don't have this idea of consciousness, he says, if a being is not capable of suffering or of experiencing enjoyment or happiness, there's nothing to be taken into account. This is why the limit of sentience is the only defensible boundary of a concern for the interests of others. To mark this boundary by some characteristic like intelligence or rationality, which you mentioned earlier, would be to mark it in an arbitrary way. Why not choose some other characteristic like skin color? And where I think, like, you mentioned it about being black and white, is how he mentions about skin color. Like, it'll be easy to tell if something has consciousness or not. And to kind of now just put this one thing to talk about it, do you think a snail is conscious?
A snail. I think.
Yes, a snail, bro. A freaking snail.
I think snails are. So I think off topic. I think this is exact question I was asked on one of my finals when I was like still taking psychology. I think it's similar to like my point about ants. I think a lot of what they do can be deduced down to like chemical signals. So they do things according to like what chemicals they feel. What I guess I don't remember exactly, but I think like the little antennas do a lot of that. And then with ants, I think they say that they smell the chemicals or something. I'm not an expert, but that's hard.
So, just to, I guess, quickly interject. I had a lot of details I'm going to go over, but based on the time, to just quickly sum up what what this paper was about and why I bring it up. There's this guy, Eric Switchgable, pretty cool last name, Switchgable. Kind of had to learn how to spell that for a while. Basically, my professor learned from him, and he wrote this article called "Is There Something It's Like to Be a Garden Snail?" Essentially, what he looked into it was, and I kind of mentioned him earlier, the idea of consciousness, applying it to a snail, also all these theories of consciousness, and then what answer do we come out with? And we have 3 answers. Yes, no, and gong. Gong is basically kind of just, was based off of the show, but essentially just kind of means it's unanswerable. Like, it has kind of, it's irrelevant, or it's weird. And, to sum it up, it's just basically from in before and after. I can go into all the theories he talks about, but, we don't got time for that. But from at least first looking at it, at least before our thoughts, it seems like every answer has something going for it. So we can't lean towards one or the other. And then after saying everything and even knowing more about the snail, we still can't Now, like, overall, his point from understanding from my professor was just that we don't really have this idea about consciousness. Like, wouldn't you agree, like, from based on seeing both of us struggle with this conversation, that we have no real ill-defined, categorized idea about consciousness?
Yeah, definitely. I do think I think I kind of disagree with some other philosopher that you were referencing before this about
Right,
the
Singer?
spectrum thing. I think.
Yeah.
Uh, Personally, I think like intelligence is different from consciousness. Is what I think. I think you can be intelligent, but not conscious. Like
Dude,
I
yes.
think a
Sorry, go ahead.
computer definitely smarter than me. You can give me a very complex calculus problem. I would need 30 minutes and like 3 pieces of paper to solve it. A computer can like spit out the result in half a second. I think it's smarter than me, but I wouldn't say that computer is conscious. At least not yet.
So, dude, I feel you. Part of you said not yet. That scares me. Um, and that's kind of leading to this as we're kind of wrapping up in this kind of few final minutes. But hopefully we'll be able to expand our full thoughts on it, and I want to hear your thoughts too, because I know I've been talking a lot, trying to reference stuff from the class. So let's just actually talk about it real quick. You know, screw this last piece of material. I was going to talk about what. So first, okay, so it's leading. It's basically we're leading to this idea, at least with the class, and my understanding was is AI ever going to be conscious? And I think as being studying data science, that's like a scary ass term to say. Recently, right, there's been this huge wave of AI with ChatGPT. First time my interaction with it was in class, and it scared the fuck out of me, dude. Like we talked about this before. You remember my reaction. I was genuinely scared in the sense of like how fast it was able to create stuff, and accurate. How the grammar, the syntax, and everything just was so accurate relative to like the robots, like or stuff that we had like 10 years ago. Um. Anyway, sorry. So I rambled. My overall point is, I think, leading my question: do you think AI could be conscious?
uh, Dude, I think that depends on what we define as consciousness again. I think,
Well, so like, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, I think we can make it. Like I said, I think it's very possible with our current technology and our current understanding of like human brains to make it emulate like a human brain. But uh because like I think computers, like just going back to like the history of just computers and Turing machines, I think at the very beginning of this kind of technology is the end goal was just to model this piece of technology after human brains anyway.
Mhm.
A lot of like terms in computer science is actually derived from like fields like psychology, like stuff like short-term memory, long-term memory. Like all of that has history in biology and psychology. But can we ever emulate like the nuances? Like I think I don't know because like humans are imperfect, and then computers can be imperfect, but you gotta kind of make it imperfect, and that's kind of artificial. And you're kind of, I don't know, at that point you're just kind of playing God. It's not really like a genuine thing. So I don't know. I think right now with our current understanding, I don't think it's possible for it to be at a point where we would consider it conscious. But I would say it can get very close that it gets very scary, and it can start making uh decisions that would seem like it has consciousness, but really it's just like a, a computer thing, and then it's it's how it came to that decision after like very like millions of scenarios, and it thinks it's like the optimal one.
Let me ask you this. Okay, so I think my first, just give me a short answer. If you had to die on a hill, right? On which answer?
Yeah,
Yes, AI could be conscious, or no, it can't. Which would you die on?
no.
I personally would die on yes.
Okay.
You say no.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So I think yes. Now to over well now so the overall point, and I think you and I agree, it's getting scary and of how advanced it's getting, and and then like if you can just quickly shortly answer in data science, have y'all when you were learning and in school and everything, did y'all ever consider the ethical issues with AI and everything, or just more of like how to do it?
Yeah, ethics in data science is actually one of the biggest fields. Sorry, biggest
Very good.
questions. It's so important. I think it's gotten so big that I mean, I personally had to take like at least two classes on like one of them on ethics and one on like data governance, is which is just like how you use data. And there's all like very big universities like UC Berkeley actually I think are introduced a new major in specifically uh like ethics and data science. So yeah, it's a very big topic.
That's actually pretty good to hear. Not gonna lie, I think just from carrying in my class and also seeing how fast it's getting advanced, and just I think you and I, we talked about before with the tech bubble bursting. It's like how advanced it was and fast it was going. It didn't seem like ethics was really taken into consideration. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
I
it's for how. Go ahead.
yeah, I think for a good amount of time it definitely wasn't a big consideration. A lot of big companies don't. I mean, to them, it's like a new frontier. It makes them money, whether or not it's right or not. I mean, we don't, because it's so new. We don't have really have laws against it either. And even if we
Right.
do start regulating it, we don't know where to cross the line. So it's like I don't know. It's really hard.
No, no, for sure. And then it's like I think it's like weird for us, especially in this generation, because it seems like it's just exponentially getting more complex. And yeah, no, it's just like I think that's kind of the whole point of I was getting at with this conversation with you, and also why I kind of chose you is just like knowing you actually study this stuff, right? And also, granted, you have the background in psychology, you have the background in data science. We talked about tech before and everything. Is I wanted to actually hear your opinions. It was actually cool that you had the doubts of it too. I have the doubts, and I guess where I mean, what I want to touch on with just the ethics is like it's cool with philosophy, as in like for us, we're really like examining and studying it, like what gives it consciousness, what gives it, and also like can we make it? Like you said, are we playing God, which is even more scarier, right? I think that's like taken for granted a bit. And then further is, how far is this gonna go? Because like since by not like considering any kind of ethics, which maybe is the job of philosophers, is it we saw or we're seeing like the end results, and I guess I'm just scared where it could end. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is gonna be pretty short. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's moving too fast. Innovations are also very fast. And there's a lot of so just to give some meat to my answer. I think so. There's this term in data science specifically that we give to algorithms that are very complex and very hard to define, and we call it the black box. The reason we call these algorithms black boxes is because a lot of these like deep learning algorithms, they train to improve by themselves, and then there's very minimal manual like tweaking to them. So eventually they get very smart, they get very good at their jobs, very efficient, very low error rates. But when you start digging into the code and you start looking at the math, it's kind of impossible to see what is actually going on inside the algorithm. So
Hmm.
that is why we call it a black box. Like it's kind of like Pandora's box. You don't really open it. Like you just you know it does its job. You feed it something. It gives it an output. It does its job. That's the end of the story. Uh,
And I think that's exactly where it's like in terms of ethically, like shouldn't in a way should be concerned with that though.
yeah, definitely. I think so as well. But it's like how. I think the question is how you kind of regulate that, because eventually it's going to be very good at its job, and it's going to start doing things that might not be ethical, but to its like mathematical algorithm, it's still the best thing to do. But as human beings, we don't think it's really good to do.
For
So
sure.
at that point, we probably have to make regulations. We probably have to tweak manually. We have to do things to kind of make it worse almost. Uh, but if we start doing that, that's the question of are we kind of like stopping innovation, and then like how far do we push it?
No, and then like, I mean, a lot of thoughts you put it here have been making me think about it too. Um, and like, I think that just to kind of finally wrap this up as we're running into this last couple minutes, from the class, I've taken also is that the only way we can really examine this and kind of form some form of truth is in sci-fi movies. And like, if you think about it, a lot of the sci-fi movies are now becoming reality. Like, I remember Back to the Future, right? We always kind of memed on it, or not meme, but it's not to say going back to the future time travel, but like some of the technology of strapless shoes, right? A flying car, like a lot of those thoughts are now real. And yeah, and just essentially to end it off is I think the only way we can really extrapolate any kind of ethics, rules, or regulation as of now, which is it sounds so absurd to say, but it's from movies, which were never even meant to create these kind of ethics, I would like to believe. It's meant to be art or some form of entertainment. I mean, can you think of any like movies or any, and then also any final thoughts you want to say?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. But then I think my final thought, and I don't want us to answer this because it's probably gonna take too long. I think my final thought is it the chicken or the egg? So a lot of these like sci-fi movies that you're saying are becoming reality. Uh, I think the creativity of that resulted in a lot of the innovations uh that we have today, because we're trying to do what these sci-fi movies were doing, because that's kind of
Hmm.
yeah. But is it are we purposely like pushing our innovations to be like these sci-fi movies, or are these sci-fi movies really just like uh a natural progression of the things? So again, is it the chicken or the egg? We don't I personally don't know.
Yeah, you do, because
Yeah.
you're boy genius. Oh wait, no, that's me.
Jimmy Neutron.
Anyways, I hope he gets the reference. I'm not gonna lie, off my profile picture. Um, anyways, just want to say actually though, thank you, David, for willing to do this podcast with me. It was actually really cool to hear your thoughts on it. Some of this stuff I have heard from you before. Some of this stuff actually I'd never heard from you. and during the break, I know you were shocked to hear this stuff. But I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I hope you get an A.
Dude, I just hope I
And
pass,
I
bro.
hope you
I just hope I
pay me.
pass.
I just hope that you pay me the $500 you promised me for recording this. That's all I care about.
Dude, I know you're recording it, so can you end the recording? Can you end the recording? Can
Alright,
you end the
goodbye,
recording?
everyone.
Oh yeah, I forgot. You asked me to cite my sources at the end. I referenced Peter Singer. All animals are equal. Eric Switchgable. Is there something it's like to be a garden snail? Lectures from Kinsborough Moore in class of Being and Knowing. And also, I was hoping to possibly touch on Robots Should Be Slaves by Joanna Bryson. Didn't really get to that. And also citing the really smart and beloved friend David Liang. Thank you.